The Galactic Coalition Academy was the oldest school in the known universe. It sat on a small moon called, far away from any busy trade routes or noisy cities. For 10,000 years, students from hundreds of different species had come here to learn. They studied science, art, history, and diplomacy. The academy was proud of its long tradition. But in all those 10,000 years, no human had ever taught here. Professor arrived on a small shuttle on a cold morning. She was short, even by human standards, and she carried only one bag. Her black hair was tied back in a simple style, and she wore plain dark clothes. She looked like someone who did not want to be noticed. The academy director, a large amphibian creature named Counselor, met her at the landing pad. Stood nearly 3 meters tall. His skin was wet and greenish, and his wide eyes blinked slowly as he looked down at the tiny human. Professor said in a deep voice, "Welcome to the academy. I hope your journey was comfortable." It was fine, said. She looked around at the ancient stone buildings and the purple sky above. This place is beautiful. It has stood for 10, said proudly. Many great minds have walked these halls. Nodded politely. She did not seem impressed, but she did not seem rude either. She simply seemed calm, like someone who had seen many things and was not easily surprised anymore. Led her through the campus. Students of all shapes and sizes walked past them. They were tall and covered in silver scales. They moved with grace and spoke in soft, musical voices. The eye were smaller, with hard shells and many legs. They clicked when they talked and always seemed to be in a hurry. There were dozens of other species too, each one stranger than the last. All of them stared at as she passed. "They are curious about you," explained. "Humanity is still new to the galactic community. Your species only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. Many here have never seen a human before." "I understand," said. Some of them paused, choosing his words carefully. Some of them wonder what a human could possibly teach at such an old and respected institution. Smiled slightly. "I suppose they will find out." Her classroom was Lecture Hall 7, a large circular room with seats rising up in tiers like a stadium. When walked in for her first class, she found over 200 students waiting for her. Most of them were an I, but there were others too. In the back row, she noticed several older beings who were clearly not students. They were faculty members and diplomats who had come to watch the new human professor. Set her data tablet on the podium and looked out at the crowd. The room was completely silent. Everyone was waiting. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "My name is, I will be teaching Introduction to War Tactics this semester." A low murmur went through the crowd. War tactics was not a popular subject at the academy. Most species in the coalition had not fought a real war in centuries. They considered violence to be primitive and beneath them. A student in the front row raised his clawed hand. His scales were bright silver, which meant he was young and probably from a wealthy family. His name tag said. "Yes," said. "Professor," said politely, "I mean no disrespect, but what qualifies humanity to teach this subject? Your species is very young. You have only been in space for a few decades." Some of the other students nodded in agreement. It was a fair question. Did not seem offended. She clasped her hands behind her back and thought for a moment. "You are right," she said. "Humanity is young. We are newcomers to the stars, but we have been fighting wars on our home planet for a very, very long time." She tapped her data tablet, and a holographic display appeared above the podium. It showed a simple timeline. The oldest evidence of organized warfare among humans dates back about 14,000 years, said. Since then, we have fought constantly. Large wars, small wars, wars between nations, wars within nations, wars over land, resources, religion, ideology, and sometimes for reasons that made no sense at all. She looked at the timeline, which was covered in thousands of small marks. Each mark represented a conflict. We have detailed records of approximately 15,000 named wars, continued. The actual number, including smaller conflicts and battles, is much higher. We stopped counting long ago. The room had gone very quiet. So, said, before we begin, I need to ask you a question. Human warfare has gone through many different eras. Each era has its own weapons, strategies, and philosophies. We do not have time to cover everything in one semester. She looked out at her students. Do you want to study pre-nuclear warfare or post-nuclear warfare? Nobody spoke. The silence stretched on for several long seconds. Finally, a I student in the middle section raised one of her many legs. Her name tag said, unlike most I, she seemed nervous rather than busy. Professor, clicked softly, what do you mean by nuclear? Paused. She realized that many species in the coalition had never developed nuclear weapons. They had skipped that technology entirely on their way to cleaner energy sources. Nuclear weapons, said slowly, are bombs that split atoms apart. The explosion releases enormous amounts of energy. A single nuclear bomb can destroy an entire city in less than a second. The fire and radiation can kill millions of people. She let that sink in. Humanity invented these weapons about 80 years before we achieved space travel. We then proceeded to build enough of them to destroy our entire planet several times over. Scales had gone pale. You built weapons that could destroy your own world. Why would any species do such a thing? His expression was hard to read. That, she said quietly, is one of the questions we will explore this semester. She turned back to the class. So, pre-nuclear or post, the choice is yours. After a long moment, spoke again. His voice was barely a whisper. Pre-nuclear, he said, let us start at the beginning. Nodded, very well. Let us begin with what my people call ancient history. She pulled up a new holographic display. It showed a map of Earth, focused on a region called Europe. This is the year 1803, she said, and this is the beginning of what we call the wars. The students leaned forward. They did not know it yet, but their understanding of the universe was about to change forever. The holographic map of Earth floated above the podium, glowing softly in the dim lecture hall. 200 pairs of eyes watched as Professor touched the display and zoomed in on a small part of the planet. This region is called Europe, said. It is not very large. You could fit it inside some of the smaller moons in your home systems. But for most of human history, this small piece of land saw more wars than anywhere else on Earth. She moved her hand and the map changed. Small colored shapes appeared, each one representing a different nation. There were dozens of them, all pressed together like pieces of a broken puzzle. In the year 1803, these nations went to war, continued. The fighting lasted for 12 years. We call this the wars, named after one of our greatest military leaders. A student near the front raised his hand. It was again the young one with bright silver scales. Professor, you said this region is small. How many soldiers could such a small area produce? Smiled slightly. It was the smile of someone who knew what was coming. At the height of these wars, France alone had an army of over 1 million soldiers, she said. The nations fighting against France had even more. In total, approximately 6 million soldiers fought in these wars. The number hung in the air. Several students began whispering to each other. 6 million, the I student clicked in disbelief. 6 million soldiers in a single war. In a single war on a single continent, corrected. Other wars were happening at the same time in other parts of our world. She waved her hand and the display changed again. Now it showed tiny figures moving across the map like ants. Armies marched, borders shifted, cities burned. The wars killed approximately 5 million people, said. Soldiers and civilians both. Many died in battle. Many more died from disease, starvation, and the cold. Counselor, who had been watching from the back of the room, shifted uncomfortably. His wet skin had gone pale. "Professor," he interrupted, "perhaps we should provide some context for our students. The people have fought exactly 3 wars in their entire history. The total deaths from all 3 wars combined was approximately 8,000. Nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Counselor, that is useful context." She turned back to her students. "As you can see, human warfare operates on a different scale, but it is not just about numbers, it is about how we fight. The tactics, the strategies, the way we think about conflict." She pulled up a new image. It showed rows of soldiers standing in perfect lines, holding long weapons with sharp blades at the end. "This is called infantry," explained. "Foot soldiers. In the era, they fought in formations like this. They would march toward the enemy in straight lines, shoulder to shoulder. When they got close enough, they would fire their weapons and then charge with bayonets." "They walked toward the enemy," asked. "In straight lines, would they not be easy to kill?" "Yes," said simply. "Many of them died, but more would take their place. The armies were so large that commanders could afford to lose thousands of soldiers in a single battle and still keep fighting." She showed them images of cavalry charges, where soldiers rode on animals called horses and crashed into enemy lines with swords and lances. She showed them artillery, huge metal tubes that fired explosive shells across great distances. She showed them naval battles, where wooden ships carrying hundreds of cannons would blast each other to pieces on the open sea. The students watched in horrified silence. "I do not understand," finally said. Her voice was quiet and shaking. "Why would soldiers agree to fight like this? Why would they march into certain death?" Paused. This was always the hardest part to explain. "Many reasons," she said. "Some fought for their country, some fought for their leader, some fought because they were forced to, and some," she paused again, "some fought because they believed in something, an idea, a cause, they were willing to die for it." "But the odds," continued. "You said millions died. The soldiers must have known they might not survive. How could they keep fighting?" Walked slowly around the podium. "There is a concept in human psychology called courage. It is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act despite fear. Humans have always had this ability. Sometimes it leads us to do terrible things. Sometimes it leads us to do wonderful things. Often, it leads us to do both at the same time." She stopped and looked directly at "Your people, the Eye, abandoned warfare after a single battle killed 200 soldiers. That battle was so traumatic that it changed your entire civilization. Is that correct?" Nodded slowly. "Yes, we call it the Day of Sorrow. It happened 3,000 years ago. We have been peaceful ever since." 200 deaths," repeated softly. "In human terms, that would be a small skirmish, a minor engagement. It would barely make the history books." She turned to address the whole class again. "I'm not saying this to insult you or to make light of suffering. 200 deaths is 200 deaths. Each one was a person with a life and a family. But I need you to understand the scale of human warfare. I need you to understand what we have survived." She pulled up one final image. It showed a painting of a battle scene. Thousands of soldiers fought in a muddy field. Bodies lay everywhere. Smoke filled the sky. "This is the Battle of," said. "It was one of the largest battles of the wars. It lasted only one day. In that single day, approximately 70,000 soldiers were killed or wounded." 70,000. The number seemed impossible. "After the battle," continued, "both armies claimed victory, and then they kept fighting. The war continued for 3 more years." Had been silent for a long time. Now he spoke, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Professor, you called these wars ancient history. You said they happened over 200 years ago. If this is ancient history, what came later?" Looked at him for a long moment. Her dark eyes held something that might have been sadness, or might have been something else entirely. What came later, she said quietly, was worse, much worse. She turned off the holographic display. The lecture hall was silent. That is enough for today, said. We will continue next week. I suggest you take some time to process what you have learned. As the students filed out of the room, many of them looked shaken. Some were crying. Others walked in silence, their minds struggling to comprehend what they had heard. Was the last to leave. He stopped at the door and looked back at. Professor, he said, how do your people live with this history? How do you carry the weight of so much death? Began packing up her data tablet. She did not look up. We remember, she said simply. We honor the dead, we try to learn from our mistakes, and we keep moving forward. She finally looked at him. It is the only way we know how to survive. Nodded slowly. He did not fully understand, not yet, but he was beginning to. As he walked out into the purple twilight he realized that his view of humans had changed forever. They were not just young newcomers to the galaxy. They were survivors of something he could barely imagine. And their lessons were only beginning. By the third week of classes, Professor's lectures had become famous throughout the academy. Students from other departments began asking for permission to attend. Scientists, artists, diplomats, and historians all wanted to see the human professor who taught horrors. When walked into Lecture Hall 7 that morning, she found it packed beyond capacity. Over 500 beings filled every seat, stood in the aisles, and crowded near the doors. Some had brought recording devices. Others had brought friends who had never taken a single class in their lives. Counselor stood at the back with several other faculty members. His face was troubled, but he did not stop the lecture. Looked at the massive crowd and said nothing. She simply set down her data tablet and waited for silence. Today, she began, we leave the 19th century behind. We move forward 130 years to a conflict my people call World War II. She pulled up a holographic globe of Earth. Large sections of the planet began to glow red. This war lasted 6 years, said. It was fought on every continent except one. It involved almost every nation on Earth, and it introduced a concept that changed warfare forever. She paused, letting the silence build. Total war. A student raised her hand. She was older than, with darker scales and careful eyes. What does that term mean, Professor? Total war means that there is no difference between soldiers and civilians, explained. In total war, entire societies become weapons. Factories produce guns instead of goods. Farmers grow food for armies instead of families. Scientists create new ways to kill instead of new ways to heal. Everyone fights. Everyone suffers. Everyone is a target. She changed the display to show black and white images of cities. Smoke rose from burning buildings. People ran through rubble-filled streets. In World War II, cities were bombed not to destroy military targets, but to break the spirit of the people living there. The goal was to make the enemy so tired, so hungry, so afraid, that they would surrender. Did it work? Someone asked. His expression was hard to read. Sometimes, but more often it only made people angrier. It made them fight harder. She showed them factory images, rows and rows of machines building weapons, workers laboring day and night, production numbers that seemed impossible. During this war, the United States of America built over 300,000 aircraft. They built 88,000 tanks. They built millions of guns and billions of bullets, and they were just one nation among many. The numbers were staggering. Several students had to check their translators to make sure they were hearing correctly. The death toll of World War II, continued, was approximately 70 to 80 million people. We do not know the exact number. There were too many dead to count. 70 million. The room was completely silent. Some students looked sick. Others had tears in their eyes. Among those dead were 11 million people who were not killed in battle, said. Her voice had grown quieter. They were killed in camps. murdered by their own government because of their religion, their ethnicity, or their beliefs. We call this the Holocaust. It is one of the greatest crimes in human history. She showed them images, thin faces behind barbed wire, piles of bodies, empty shoes that had belonged to children. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. I show you these images not to shock you, said. I show you because you need to understand what humans are capable of, both the evil and the response to that evil. Because while some humans committed these crimes, other humans fought and died to stop them. She changed the display again. Now it showed soldiers landing on beaches, fighting through snow, liberating prison camps. Millions of young men and women left their homes to fight against this darkness. Many of them never came back. They knew they might die. They went anyway. The eye student who had been attending every lecture raised a leg. Her voice was small. Professor, you said this war introduced total war, but surely this must be the worst of it. Surely nothing could be worse. Did not answer immediately. She walked slowly to the side of the podium and stood there for a moment, looking at the floor. My grandmother was born in a country called Korea, she finally said. During this war, Korea was occupied by another nation called Japan. The occupation was brutal. My grandmother's village was burned when she was 14 years old. She survived by hiding in a river for 3 days. She watched her neighbors die. She watched her school become a prison. The room was absolutely still. She lived to be 97 years old, continued. She taught me many things, how to cook, how to survive, how to remember the past without being trapped by it. She looked up at her students. She also taught me that even in the darkest times, humans can find hope, can find each other, can rebuild. She walked back to the podium. But you asked if this was the worst of it. The answer is no. She pulled up a new image. It showed a massive explosion, a mushroom-shaped cloud rising into the sky. On August 6, 1945, a human aircraft dropped a single bomb on a Japanese city called Hiroshima. The bomb used nuclear fission to release enormous energy. In less than 1 second, approximately 80,000 people died. Many more died later from burns and radiation sickness. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on another city called Nagasaki. It killed approximately 40,000 more. Several students stood up and left the room. Others covered their eyes or turned away from the images. A few were openly crying. These 2 bombs ended World War II, said. Japan surrendered 6 days later. The war was over. She turned off the display. But a new era had begun. The nuclear era. Humans had created weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds, and over the following decades we built more of them. Bigger ones, better ones. We built enough nuclear weapons to destroy every city on Earth, to kill every human being alive, to make our planet uninhabitable for thousands of years. She looked at her students. Many of them were shaking. Many looked like they wanted to run away and never come back. And yet here we are, said. We did not destroy ourselves. We came close many times, but we survived. We are still here. His voice broke the silence. How? How did you survive? How do you live knowing that you could destroy yourselves at any moment? Considered the question carefully. We learned, she said simply. Not perfectly, not completely, but we learned that some weapons are too terrible to use. We learned that survival requires cooperation. We learned that our greatest enemy is often ourselves. She began packing up her things. This is where pre-nuclear warfare ends and post-nuclear warfare begins. Next week, I will teach you about deterrence, mutually assured destruction, and the strange peace that comes from being afraid of your own weapons. As the students filed out, many of them walked in silence. The weight of what they had learned pressed down on them like a physical force. Counselor approached after the room had emptied. Professor, he said slowly, I am beginning to understand why humans were kept out of the academy for so long. Your history is difficult to hear. Nodded, yes, It is difficult for us to tell, too. Looked at her with his large, wet eyes. And yet you teach it anyway. Why? Picked up her bag and walked toward the door. She paused before leaving. Because those who do not learn from history, she said quietly, are doomed to repeat it, and there are some mistakes that can only be made once. She walked out into the purple twilight, leaving Counselor alone with his thoughts. The emergency meeting of the Academy Board took place in the Great Hall, a massive chamber beneath the oldest building on campus. The walls were carved from ancient stone, covered in writings from civilizations that had died before humans learned to make fire. 12 council members sat in a circle, their faces grave. Counselor stood in the center, his webbed hands clasped behind his back. "We are here to discuss the human professor," he said. "Specifically, whether her courses should continue to be taught at this academy." A council member named Elder Suk clicked angrily. "This should not even be a question. Have you seen the medical reports? Dozens of students have sought treatment for anxiety and nightmares. 3 have dropped out entirely. Her lectures are causing psychological damage." "She is teaching history," another council member argued. This was matriarch, an elderly with faded silver scales. "Should we ban all difficult subjects? Should we pretend the universe is only beauty and peace?" "There is a difference between difficult and traumatic," Elder Suk shot back. "No species needs to know about nuclear weapons or death camps. This knowledge serves no purpose except to spread fear." The debate continued for nearly an hour. Some council members wanted expelled immediately. Others defended academic freedom. Most were simply confused about what to do. Finally, a door at the back of the chamber opened. Ambassador walked in. The council members turned to look at him. Was no longer a simple student. 3 months of professor's lectures had changed him. His scales had darkened slightly, a sign of stress and deep thinking in. His eyes carried a weight they had not carried before. "Ambassador," Counselor said, surprised. "This is a closed meeting. How did you get in?" "I asked," said simply, "and I was told I could speak." The council members exchanged glances. Came from one of the oldest and most powerful families. His opinion carried weight. "Very well," said, "speak." Walked to the center of the chamber and looked at each council member in turn. "I have listened to every one of Professor's lectures," he said. "I have seen the images she shows. I have heard the numbers she recites. I have felt the horror that you are all so afraid of." He paused. "And I believe it is the most important education I have ever received." Elder Suk made a disgusted clicking sound. "You are young. You do not understand the damage this knowledge can cause." "With respect, Elder, I think I understand it better than you do." His voice was calm but firm. "I have been damaged by this knowledge. I have nightmares about mushroom clouds and death camps. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about numbers. 70 million dead, 15,000 wars, weapons that can destroy worlds." He turned to face the whole council. "But I am also stronger than I was before. I understand things I never understood. I see the universe more clearly." "What things?" Matriarch asked gently. Took a deep breath. "The hegemony of has been expanding toward coalition space for nearly a century," he said. "They have taken 11 star systems that used to belong to coalition members. They have enslaved billions of beings. And what has the coalition done in response?" No one answered. "We have debated," continued. "We have negotiated. We have made diplomatic protests. We have offered trade agreements and cultural exchanges, and they have kept taking, system after system, world after world." He walked closer to Elder Suk. "How many wars has the coalition fought in its 10,000-year history?" Elder Suk shifted uncomfortably. "That is not relevant to." "How many?" pressed. 7, Matriarch answered quietly. "The coalition has fought 7 defensive wars. We lost 4 of them." "And how many of those wars involved actual combat?" Silence. Two said finally. The other five ended in negotiated surrenders before significant fighting occurred. Nodded slowly. We do not know how to fight. We do not know how to win. Our military doctrine consists of strategic withdrawal and diplomatic resolution. We give up territory to avoid casualties because we cannot stomach the thought of losing soldiers. He turned back to the center of the room. They know this. They have studied us for centuries. They know that if they push hard enough, we will always step back. They know that if they kill enough of us, we will surrender rather than keep fighting. What is your point, Ambassador? Counselor asked. My point, said, is that humanity is different. He pulled out a small data pad and activated a holographic display. It showed a map of coalition space with territory marked in red. In 3 years, the fleet will reach prime. When that happens, we will have two choices. We can surrender and become slaves, or we can fight. He looked at each council member. If we fight, we will need to do more than wave our ships around and hope they go away. We will need to actually kill them. We will need to be willing to die ourselves. We will need to understand war in a way we never have before. He turned off the display. Professor is teaching us how to survive. She is teaching us that war is terrible, yes, but it is sometimes necessary. She is teaching us that a species can endure unimaginable horrors and still keep going, still build, still hope, still love. His voice grew stronger. Humanity crawled out of nuclear fire. They destroyed their own environment and then rebuilt it. They committed genocide against each other and then swore never again. They have seen the absolute worst of what intelligent beings can do, and they are still here, still reaching for the stars, still trying to be better. He walked toward the door. If they come for I want a human at my side, because they know something we have never learned, something we desperately need to understand. And what is that? Counselor asked. Stopped at the door and looked back. How to win. He left the chamber. The council members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Matriarch spoke. Her voice was old and tired, but there was something new in it, something like hope. Perhaps, she said slowly, we have been protecting ourselves from the wrong things. Perhaps the greatest danger is not knowledge of war. Perhaps it is ignorance of it. Counselor looked around the chamber. The faces of his fellow council members had changed. Some looked frightened, some looked thoughtful, some looked ashamed. We will vote, he said. All those in favor of allowing Professor to continue her lectures. One by one, hands and claws and tentacles rose into the air. The vote was unanimous. 3 days later, Professor received a message from the Academy Board. Her courses would not only continue, they would be expanded. War tactics would become a required subject for all students studying diplomacy, politics, or military science. She read the message twice, then set it aside and returned to preparing her next lecture. There was still so much to teach, and time, she knew, was running out. The invasion came 6 months earlier than anyone expected. Ambassador was on a diplomatic mission when he heard the news. The fleet had jumped into space with over 3,000 warships. They had bypassed the outer defenses entirely and struck directly at The coalition fleet responded quickly, but it was not enough. The ships were larger, better armed, and crewed by soldiers who had been fighting wars for centuries. Within 4 days, the coalition fleet was scattered. They began landing troops on Prime. Rushed back to his on the fastest ship he could find. When he arrived, the capital city was already burning. Coalition command had retreated to underground bunkers. The admiral, an elderly named High Commander Soon, had already drafted surrender documents. He was waiting for the right moment to transmit them. We cannot win this fight, Soon said. His voice was tired and defeated. They have 10 soldiers for every one of ours. Their weapons are stronger. Their will is stronger. The only way to save lives is to surrender now before more of our people die. Looked at the Admiral with something like pity. With respect, Commander, that is exactly what they want us to think. He turned and walked out of the command bunker. He had somewhere else to be. The academy had been evacuated when the invasion began. Most of the students and faculty had fled to neutral systems. But when arrived at the burned-out remains of the campus, he found that not everyone had left. Professor was sitting in the ruins of Lecture Hall 7. Around her sat a small group of beings, the Eye, a young soldier named, a massive four-armed being called Myra, and about 20 others. They were all former students from her war tactics class. Professor said, "You should have evacuated." Looked up at him. Her face was dirty and tired, but her eyes were sharp. "I considered it," she said. "But then I thought about what I have been teaching all semester. What would it mean if I ran away the first time those lessons became real?" She stood up and brushed dust from her clothes. "Besides," she added, "these students came to me. They wanted to learn something that was not in the official curriculum." Looked at the group. They were frightened, clearly, but there was something else in their eyes, something hard and determined. "What are you teaching them?" he asked. Smiled slightly. "Practical resistance." Over the following weeks, taught her small group everything she knew about guerrilla warfare. She told them about the Korean resistance fighters who had opposed the Japanese occupation. She told them about the French Maquis who had sabotaged Nazi supply lines. She told them about the Vietnamese who had fought against armies many times their size and won. "You cannot defeat them in open battle," she explained. "They are too strong, too numerous. But you can make occupation so painful, so costly, that they decide it is not worth the trouble." She taught them how to make weapons from everyday objects, how to hide in plain sight, how to gather information without being noticed, how to strike quickly and disappear before the enemy could respond. "The most important weapon," she said, "is not a gun or a bomb. It is patience. It is the willingness to keep fighting long after your enemy expects you to give up." They had expected them to surrender within a week. Instead, they found a planet that refused to die. Supply convoys were attacked in the night. Officers disappeared from their quarters and were found days later, dead in places that should have been secure. Communications towers were destroyed faster than they could be rebuilt. And everywhere, a message appeared on walls and screens and broadcast channels. "We do not forgive, we do not forget, and we never ever stop." The message was recorded in voice. Months passed. The occupation became a nightmare for the commanders. For every rebel they killed, two more seemed to appear. Their soldiers grew paranoid, jumping at shadows, trusting no one. Morale collapsed. Meanwhile, the coalition was reorganizing. Ambassador had sent detailed reports about the resistance to coalition high command. He had also sent copies of professors' lectures. For the first time in its history, the coalition began training its soldiers to fight, really fight, not just for strategic objectives but for survival. They studied human military doctrine. They learned about combined arms tactics, about logistics and supply lines, about the psychological aspects of warfare. When the coalition counterattack finally came, it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The new coalition fleet did not retreat when it took casualties. It pressed forward. Coalition soldiers landed on Prime and fought alongside the resistance, using tactics that they had never encountered. They were willing to take risks, to suffer losses, to do whatever it took to win. The who had built their empire on the assumption that other species would always back down, did not know how to respond. In 3 weeks the occupation was over. The fleet retreated from space. For the first time in a century, they had been defeated. Ambassador found Professor in the ruins of the academy. She was sitting in the same spot where he had found her months ago, surrounded by broken stones and burned books. "We won," he said. Nodded slowly. "Yes, this time." sat down beside her. His scales were and dull from months of fighting. He looked older than he had before the war. "You could have left," he said. "When the invasion started, you could have gone back to human space where you would have been safe. Why did you stay?" Picked up a fragment of a book that had survived the fires. She turned it over in her hands. "My grandmother taught me something," she said. "Besides how to make kimchi and how to survive, she taught me that you do not abandon family." "Family," repeated. "We are not your species. We are not your people. Why would you consider us family?" Looked at him. Her dark eyes held warmth he had not seen before. "You were my students," she said simply. "You listened to me talk about the worst things my species has ever done, and you did not run away. You learned. You grew. You became braver than anyone expected." She set the book fragment aside. "Family is not just blood. It is the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. It is the people who refuse to give up, even when giving up would be easier." She smiled slightly. "By that definition, I have more family here than I ever had on Earth." Was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect among the. "I think I finally understand," he said, "why your species survived all those wars, all that horror, all that pain." O raised an eyebrow. "Why is that?" "Because you are too stubborn to do anything else." Laughed. It was the first real laugh she had allowed herself in months. It echoed through the ruined lecture hall, bright and unexpected. "Ambassador," she said, "you are finally starting to get it." She stood up and offered him her hand. "Come on," she said. "We have a lot of rebuilding to do, and I have a new curriculum to design." Took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. "What will you teach now?" he asked. Looked out at the destruction around them, at the burned buildings and the broken walls and the sky that was finally clear of smoke. "Hope," she said. "I will teach them about hope, about how humans rebuilt after every war, about how we made art and music and love in the ashes of our worst mistakes." She started walking toward the door. "The hard lessons are important," she said over her shoulder. "But so are the good ones. War is only half the story. The other half is what comes after." Followed her out into the sunlight. Above them, the purple sky was beginning to clear. In the distance, ships were landing with supplies and relief workers. The sound of construction equipment mixed with the voices of survivors calling out to each other, finding friends and family, beginning the long work of healing. It would take years to rebuild, maybe decades, but as walked beside the small human professor who had changed everything, he knew that they would succeed. Because that was what humans did. And now, thanks to one stubborn professor who refused to leave, it was what the coalition would do too. They would remember the past, they would learn from it, and they would keep moving forward. It was the only way any of them knew how to survive.